Great. Good afternoon, everybody. It is wonderful to be here in Houston. I came as part of my tour to visit my troops in the field to learn more about the FBI and its challenges and its opportunities. I picked Houston because it is a hugely important part of the FBI, and as I have learned both from afar and up close, sits in a community with a remarkable amount of cooperation among law enforcement at all levels that's reflected by the folks standing behind me. I just had a chance to meet with the prosecutors, the chiefs, the sheriffs, and the leaders of the local federal agencies here, and am incredibly struck by the depth and quality of the relationships here, which are to the benefit of the people of Houston and this entire region. One of the things I am doing, in addition to traveling around and learning the things I need to know to do this job well, is I'm doing this job. And frankly, the biggest challenge I face in my first 6 weeks is the budget challenge. We just finished the shutdown, which had 85% of the FBI working for free for 16 or 17 days. And now I face the prospect of enormous cuts to the FBI posed by the so-called sequester. Unless Congress passes the budget that contains the FBI's appropriation, I'm looking at having to reduce almost 3,500 positions from the FBI to squeeze my operations to the bone, and staring at the very real prospect of sending my folks home, all 36,000 of them, including all of my special agents, which means those here in Houston, home for an extended period of time without pay so that we can get under the cap imposed by this sequester. That does not make any sense to me. I don't think it makes any sense to my brothers and sisters in law enforcement and other agencies. I don't think it makes any sense for the taxpayers and the people that we protect. And so I'm trying to talk about it to make sure that people understand the impact that this kind of thing will have nationally and locally. An enormous bite in Houston to send over 600 employees of the FBI home for an extended period and to squeeze their budget in the ways that I'm having to. Quantico is quiet. I can't hire or train any new agents, and I and the rest of the FBI have a mission that is vital, I think, to the American people, and so I want to talk about the impact of the budget. With that, I'll just again say how excited I am to be in Houston, how great it is to be with these people here behind me, and I'd love to take your questions.
Director, if you could paint a picture for us here in Houston, if you face these cuts, what kind of impact will we see here in our city?
Well, the most immediate impact, as I said, would be in if I have to furlough people, let's say I have to send people home for a couple of weeks, the partners who are sitting behind me will lose the presence of those people on all the task forces to address violent crime, to address human trafficking, drugs, counterterrorism, counterintelligence that are so important to this area and to the country. That's an enormous impact. And then obviously the need to cut the 3,500 positions mean the vacancies in Houston cannot be filled. Can't bring on new support people, can't bring on new special agents, and then the squeezing of our operations budget means we can't spend the money we might need to spend in an emergency on overtime or equipment. So it is across the board the impact in Houston and across the country. Yes, ma'am. Well, that's a pending matter. The two folks who were taken off of a ship in the Gulf of Guinea were working closely with our counterparts in the other parts of the American government and with the Nigerians to try and bring that to a conclusion. Can't say more about it at this point in time. Yes. You're next. Well, an enormous challenge. The thing we know from looking back at, unfortunately, the hundreds of terrorist attacks that have occurred around the world and the incidents we've had here in the United States is almost every terrorist attack has surveillance that precedes it, right? Terrorists want to see the location, want to check out security at the location, so there are indicators. When we're at our best, we have people who are our eyes and ears telling law enforcement when they see something that doesn't make sense. A car that's parked in a place that doesn't make sense, somebody who's trying to enter the building, maybe to test security, who doesn't belong there. All of these things that seem out of place, folks have to tell us about them. And my advice to people is, if something doesn't feel right, don't write a narrative over it to make it seem okay, just tell somebody. It doesn't mean the person's going to get in trouble, but it means that the men and women who work for the folks behind me can go and check it out. So if you see something that gives you a feeling in the back of your neck, tell us about it. Yes, sir. Well, the first thing I've learned is that law enforcement here is hitting on all cylinders. The cylinders are pressed by the budget restraints that not just the federal government is facing, but my colleagues in state and local law enforcement, but that they're working incredibly well together, that there's an emerging challenge. It's already here, but it's an increasing challenge in human trafficking. And I also know that the Houston area has seen an uptick in violent crime in the last year or so, particularly in robberies and armed robberies. An enormous challenge for law enforcement, a dangerous development for the community. So those are a couple of things that I've seen in Houston, and I think these folks behind me are responding to well. Yes, sir.
In terms of the FBI's focus in regards to terrorism, how much of that focus is placed on how much terrorist organizations are trying to tap into the proceeds from illegal drug trade as revenue stream for activities?
The question of terrorist involvement in drugs is very important to us because terrorists need money to fund their operations, and so they're constantly looking for sources of money. We know from experience at Afghanistan that a lot of terrorist groups based there have used the opium trade to generate money. So we constantly look, and I know my colleagues at DEA constantly look at drug trafficking to see if it is generating proceeds for terrorism. Yeah. What else? There really isn't. Oftentimes when we are conducting search warrants as part of an investigation, those search warrants remain under seal, and so I'm limited in what I can say. I don't want folks to assume from that cryptic answer, though, that there is some imminent threat. Were there an imminent threat, we'd have pushed it out to our colleagues and we'd be talking about it. And so I don't want you to assume anything from that answer. Other than that, we have a continuing investigation. Well, Houston has all the challenges that a truly international city faces. Right? It's a center of international commerce and arts and education. It sits very close to an international border and waterways. So like New York, which is very similar in a lot of ways, although the weather is much better here, and I'm told the barbecue is better here. Like New York, it poses all those challenges of the great part about it is the world is here. Potentially the bad part about it is bad actors from the world will learn of Houston and be in Houston. So it's an incredibly important city for the FBI and for all of my colleagues for that reason.
Director, when you talk to the individuals with local law enforcement agencies here as well as your agency, what's the priority that you see in Houston, the #1 issue that we need to tackle here?
That's a great question. I don't think I'd point to any one issue. I ticked off a few that I know are important to my colleagues. We talked about violent crime, which obviously is closely linked to drug trafficking. We talked about this growing threat with human trafficking, which is another circumstance where I would urge folks, if you see something that gives you a bad feeling, you see young girls in a place where they shouldn't be or movement at a house that doesn't make sense, to say something. So violent crime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and then as I said, as an international city, I worry an awful lot as a Fed about the counterterrorism challenges that brings and the counterintelligence challenges that brings.
Obviously,
Sorry, one more.
I've seen your frustration when it comes to the sequester and what you face there. What do you suggest the public, if they can, do anything about this?
Well, it'd be great to have folks get educated about it and talk about it. Again, the FBI is and will always be resolutely apolitical, right? We are not part of any interest or party or group. We have to be an independent force in American life. And so I would hope that the monies that fund the Justice Department as a whole and the FBI are not caught up in broader disputes about the size and scope of our government. I would hope that we are a bipartisan, that we have bipartisan support, and I know we do. I know in both the Senate and the House there are budgets that are waiting to be passed that are supported by both Republicans and Democrats that affect our budgets, but they're just caught up in the sequester. I would hope that we can get out and away from that and let the robust discussions that make our democracy great go on, but allow us to be funded in a way we need to be. Yeah, yes, sir, and then I'll come to you, ma'am.
You had mentioned the 3,500 positions you may have to eliminate. Do you know how many of those will be in the Houston office, and when will you know if you have to start doing these first?
I've already decided that the positions have to be eliminated. We made that decision in late summer. Bob Mueller actually made that decision, and I've continued it. I don't want to tell you how many will be in Houston because I don't want the bad guys to know that answer. Everybody will take a hit, though. I don't know for sure. I have a balancing act to strike. I'm hoping that sanity will prevail and that a budget will be passed that affects the FBI, and so we won't have to send 36,000 people home. And so I'm trying to figure out how long I can wait for sanity to prevail before I have to send people home without pay. And so I don't know yet is the honest answer. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
I know you are dealing with budget, but what about any bilingual
Well, surely, because I'm happy to report many of my agents are bilingual, and so just by the law of numbers, I'm sure there's going to be an impact. But I both don't know, and if I knew, I wouldn't tell you what the impact's going to be in particular. Yeah.
Back to the 36,000, and that's just for the FBI.
Yes.
Can you give a gamut, a range of jobs or responsibilities that could be covered?
Every single job, from pick it, special agents, intelligence analysts, support folks, hostage rescue team operators, scientists at the lab, bomb technicians, overseas legal attaches. I mean, the sun will go down by the time I finish listing the number of jobs, but it's the entire gamut of the FBI. And as you said, that's not just me. I mean, I have colleagues here from the Justice family, from ATF, from DEA. Those will all be affected as well.
Can you talk about the task the FBI has? I mean, I know that the FBI investigates this and prosecutes this, but can you talk about the magnitude of healthcare fraud, especially what you see in the Houston area, all these little fly-by-night companies that go into the lower economic communities and round people up, paying them for services they really don't get. So can you talk about how much of a problem that is?
Sure. You know, what's interesting about being the FBI director is you see the breadth of your portfolio, and at the risk of making it sound like everything is important, everything is important. Healthcare fraud is an enormously important part of our docket. The challenge I face is, without the resources to investigate, I don't know what I don't know. And so when people say, well, if you're not able to hire more agents to work healthcare fraud, what will the impact of that be? I don't know, except I know there'll be an impact because there's far more healthcare fraud out there than we have found, or that we would find if we continue to investigate. So all of you know healthcare is in the news today. Healthcare is an enormous part of this economy and of all of our lives. I have to have the resources to address that adequately. Yeah, someone else had a hand. Yes, sir.
Director, what is your total budget for the FBI and with the sequester coming? What kind of cut monetarily with specificity are you looking at?
Sure. The budget's about $8 billion, and I have to cut north of $700 million. So somewhere between 9 and 10% cut for this year alone. And then if this continues, then there's another cut on top of that for the next year. I suppose at some point I'll be standing here alone. Anything else?
How's the FBI working with human trafficking here in Houston? What are they doing to solve that problem?
Well, the FBI is working with, in a terrific task force with state and local and other federal agencies to try and address it here in Houston. We are trying to devote more resources to it here in Houston because we think that effort pays enormous dividends across all of these agencies. And as I said, we think it's a very, very important and growing challenge we face because drug traffickers, if they have a pipeline to bring packages in, they have a pipeline to bring human beings in. And unfortunately, the great city of Houston sits in a place where people have established routes of travel that they can just as easily travel with people who are going to be victimized. Okay, well, thank you all very much.